The world often forgets the quiet ones, those who work behind doors that never open to applause. In the basement of an aging monastery library, among crumbling shelves and air that smelled of dust and candle wax, a woman bent over a forgotten stack of books. Her name was Elena Vargas, a timid archivist whose voice rarely rose above a whisper. She catalogued without complaint, shuffled papers no one wanted, and existed like a shadow in the corners of history. Few noticed her, and fewer still imagined she could hold the key to rewriting the story of a lost civilization. It happened on a rain-soaked evening, when the storm rattled the monastery's stained-glass windows. Elena lifted a massive leather-bound Bible that seemed ready to disintegrate under its own weight. Its cover bore the scars of centuries, cracked edges, wormholes, and stains left by hands long dead. She meant only to record its condition and place it among others in the forgotten shelf, but when she opened the fragile volume, something stopped her breath cold. Between pages of psalms, pressed so tightly that the parchment left imprints on the ink, were faint geometric markings drawn in brown ink. They were not Latin letters, nor the scrawls of a bored monk. They were patterns deliberate, angular, spiraling, filled with tiny symbols unlike anything that belonged in a Christian text. Elena leaned closer, her heart hammering. She whispered aloud, These look like glyphs." Her fingers trembled. She had seen them once before in her student years. Mayan glyphs carved into stone stelae, half swallowed by the jungles of Guatemala. A wave of disbelief washed over her. How could Mayan symbols exist inside a Bible printed in Spain centuries after the conquest? It defied reason. And yet there they were, inked by a hand that had wanted them hidden but preserved. Her throat tightened as memory stabbed her. Years ago, in the university's dim halls, she had been mocked for her fascination with ancient glyphs. She remembered the laughter of her classmates when she stayed up late trying to trace patterns that others called indecipherable. She remembered the harsh dismissal of Professor Alvaro, who had sneered, "Miss Vargas, you will waste your life chasing ghosts. Glyphs are for legends, not for scholarship." Now those ghosts whispered from a holy book. Elena pressed her palm to the page and felt the dampness of her own sweat. She was nobody in the eyes of the academic world. But this could change everything. She closed the book quickly, afraid someone might stumble upon her discovery. Her thoughts churned in a storm louder than the thunder above. What if it's a prank? A forgery? Or worse, what if it's real? And I'm too afraid to tell anyone. She stared at the symbols long into the night, sketching them into her notebook. Each mark stirred something buried in her. The old lessons from her secret mentor, the reclusive glyph master who had once told her, "Patterns speak if you listen. Even the silence is a language." By dawn, she was certain. This was not a coincidence. Someone centuries ago had hidden a code in the pages of a sacred text, and it was Mayan, a secret message waiting to be uncovered, waiting for someone foolish or brave enough to look past ridicule. The bell of the monastery tolled. The day had begun, but for Elena, it felt like history itself had just awakened. If you're enjoying this story of justice and hidden strength, don't forget to subscribe to the channel to find out how a simple act of prejudice turned into the most valuable lesson of Professor Alvaro's life. Her eyes narrowed at the Bible's brittle pages. She would not let fear smother this discovery. The rain eased outside, leaving behind a silence that seemed to demand action. Elena placed the Bible gently into a locked drawer, as though sealing a pact with destiny. She knew the next step would drag her into a storm, greater than thunder, the storm of disbelief, mockery, and danger that awaited when she revealed what she had found. And still, she could not stop her hands from trembling with anticipation. The silence of the monastery library shattered under the echoing footsteps of Professor Alvaro. His reputation arrived before he did, sharp, uncompromising, and merciless. Elena sat with the fragile Bible closed tightly in front of her, her notes hidden beneath a stack of papers. She had debated for days whether to reveal what she had found, but secrecy weighed too heavily. If the glyphs were real, the world needed to know. She convinced herself that Alvaro, her former teacher, would at least give her words the dignity of consideration. She was wrong. When she timidly explained, pointing to the geometric sketches she had copied, the professor's face contorted into a mocking smile. Mayan glyphs? In a Catholic Bible? He laughed, the sound filling the vaulted room like thunder. Miss Vargas, you have spent far too much time with fairy tales. Perhaps you should work in children's literature instead of archives. Each word landed like a hammer. Elena flushed crimson, her lips parting but no defense escaping. His voice dripped with sarcasm as he turned to the other scholars gathered nearby. Ladies and gentlemen, behold the discovery of the century, the Virgin Mary speaking Mayan. The room erupted in laughter. Elena stared at the floor, her fists clenched so tightly her nails cut her palms. But while her humiliation grew, a spark of fury lit deep inside her. She remembered long nights as a young student, tracing symbols under candlelight, while others dismissed them as scratches. She remembered her mentor's warning: the arrogant will always mock what they cannot understand. Their laughter is fear in disguise. Alvaro, satisfied with his performance, snatched the Bible from her desk, flipped through its pages, and scoffed. These marks are ink stains. Nothing more. Do not waste our time. He dropped it carelessly back onto her table, the fragile spine groaning in protest. The archivist's heart broke at the sight, not only for the sacred text, but for the truth hidden inside it. A voice inside her whispered, "They will never believe you until you prove it beyond doubt. Show them what they cannot deny." The mocking did not end in that library. Within hours, whispers slithered through the halls of the monastery and into the academic world beyond. Elena was painted as the foolish archivist who had mistaken doodles for history. Invitations she once received to collaborate quietly stopped arriving. Colleagues avoided her, and the few who spoke offered pitying smiles that burned worse than insults. Yet humiliation forged resolve. Alone in her tiny apartment, Elena reopened her notebook, tracing the lines with steady hands. She would not let mockery bury the truth. She could hear her late father's words, spoken years ago when she first entered the world of dusty manuscripts. Courage is not silence, hija. Courage is speaking when everyone laughs. With each night, her sketches grew clearer. The patterns formed repetition. The repetition suggested intention. She began to suspect that the markings were not random at all, but a deliberate code, a code that someone centuries earlier had hidden inside Holy Scripture, hoping the right eyes would one day see it. And as the moonlight spilled across her desk, she whispered into the quiet, "I will prove you wrong, Alvaro. I will make the world listen." Nights stitched themselves into a single seam of graphite dust and lamp glow. Elena covered her tiny table with onion skin tracing paper, laid the Bible open like a wounded bird, and began to listen the way her mentor had taught her. Not with the eyes first, but with rhythm. Bars and dots, silence and strike. In the margins between psalms, thin brown lines formed ladders. Here and there, a dot sat like a dropped seed. To anyone else, it was noise. To Elena, it was a drumbeat, the vigesimal count of a people who measured the sacred in cycles. She numbered each mark and copied them into columns. The pattern snapped into place with a shock that made her gasp. The intervals repeated every 260 units, the sacred round of the tzolk'in. Every seventh page, a set of 3 glyph-like clusters appeared at identical distances. She laid transparent sheets over the pages, pricked tiny holes where the clusters sat, then passed a pencil through them to pierce a second sheet beneath. When she lifted the paper, a constellation of points stared back. It's not text, she realized. It's alignment. She pulled an 18th century colonial map from the monastery stacks, a worm-eaten depiction of the northern Guatemalan lowlands that no one had touched in years. She held her breath, aligned the constellation with the map's rough grid, and lowered the tracing paper. 3 clusters rested like talons over a blank swath of jungle where the cartographer had scribbled only 2 words, terra incognita. Her hands shook. She flipped through the Bible again, A monk's marginalia beside Psalm 29. The voice of the Lord breaks the cedars, had been meticulously scraped, replaced with faint bars and dots. In Psalm 92, the righteous shall flourish like the palm. Another cluster. Psalm 104. The trees of the Lord are watered abundantly. Trees, trees again. She whispered, ceiba, the world tree of the Maya, roots in the underworld, crown in the heavens. The code was hiding in the psalms of trees. A memory opened like a door. Years ago, before the ridicule hardened her into quiet, Elena had spent a summer in the Guatemalan highlands with her reclusive mentor, Don Mateo, a man who wore silence like a shawl and taught her to count wind by the bend of grasses. He had guided her palm across a stone stela and murmured, "The glyphs are not just meanings, they are music. If you can hear the beat, the words will follow." When she had asked why he never published, he had only smiled. Eyes on a distant mountain, some songs aren't mine to sell. He had died a winter later. She had not been to Guatemala since. Back at her desk, she pulled the pattern tight. The clusters were not arbitrary. They framed a triangle. She measured the angles, converted page numbers into distances, using the Tzolk'in cycle as a key. 260 pages to 26 leagues, 10 pages per league. A monk's hidden joke. Then marked the points on the colonial map. The triangle enclosed a basin threaded by nameless blue lines feeder streams into a wider river. In the center of that basin, nothing. She dug deeper. The monastery's catalog listed a sealed folio, Correspondencia de Fray Sebastián, 1578-1581. Access. Restricted. She stared at the notation, pulse ticking in her neck. What were you writing, Sebastian? What did you see? The next morning she approached the archives desk. Professor Alvaro was there, as if conjured by her need. "I need folio 417, Elena said, steady as a held breath. Fray Sebastián's letters. Alvaro didn't look up. Restricted. "I'm requesting temporary clearance." Denied. "On what grounds?" "On the grounds," he said, finally lifting his eyes to barbed hers, "that I won't have you vandalizing real history to fit your hobby." He leaned in, voice low. "Stop this now, Miss Vargas." Something steeled inside her. "You're afraid I'll be right." His smile didn't reach his eyes. "I'm afraid you'll embarrass us all." That night, Sister Inez, the elderly archivist who had seen Elena bring tea to staff, no one thanked, pressed a small key into her hand. 20 minutes, she whispered, "and leave no trace." The folio smelled of damp and secrets. Elena slid out a letter dated 1579. The script ran in a tight, disciplined hand. "We came upon a place where the jungle does not sing," Fray Sebastián had written. "A city that is not ruined, but waiting. I fear to name it. The Maya call it the City of Silence. Our guide would not step nearer than the ceiba that drinks the sky. He swore the earth listens there." A later paragraph shook her. "A holy book we carry bore the mark. I do not know which hand placed it. I will trust the Lord to burn away what is not of him." Elena copied the phrases with a speed that felt like prayer. Footsteps clacked in the hallway. She slipped the letter back, locked the folio, and returned the key, chest heaving. In her room, she spread the colonial map, overlaid the constellation, and wrote in pencil at the center of the triangle, "Ceiba drinks the sky." She pulled up modern satellite maps on her aging laptop and matched river bends like fingerprints. Her triangle found its twin in the Petén Basin, west of Lake Petén Itzá, in a protected reserve occasionally swept by LiDAR scans that had revealed networks of causeways, but not this. No roads, no ruins marked. Only canopy, only silence. The phone buzzed with an unknown number. She answered. Alvaro's voice arrived like cold water. "You accessed restricted materials." She said nothing. "If you pursue this," he continued, "you will not work in any library under my influence again." Elena looked at the red X she had drawn on the map. The warning sounded like permission. "They laughed because they could not hear it," she told herself. "But I can." She squared her shoulders and spoke softly, as if to him and to the jungle at once. I know where it is. The rumor found legs before she could take a breath. By noon the next day, a junior cataloger had unearthed a faded photograph tacked behind a filing cabinet. Elena, a decade younger, standing beside a weathered man in a woven hat, before a stone stela, veined with lichen. Someone sent it through the monastery group chat with a note. Is this her? With Don Mateo? The name rippled like a bell. Conversations froze. Heads turned. Those who had laughed now stared with the sudden caution of people catching themselves mid-sneer. Professor Alvaro called a meeting in the long reading room. The oil portraits of abbots watched from the walls with their painted frowns. The parquet floor gleamed with the fear of being scuffed. Elena stood at one end, hands folded, the Bible resting near her elbow like a sleeping animal. Alvaro, theatrical even in breathing, placed 2 documents on the table, her clearance request, denied, and a formal complaint. Miss Vargas, he said, his voice a scalpel. It has come to my attention that you conducted unsanctioned research into restricted correspondence, and that you have withheld materials from the archive. Hand over your notes. The request was a hammer poised over the egg of everything she had built. Elena lifted her chin. Number. A silence fell so sharp that Sister Inés pressed knuckles to her mouth to keep from gasping. Alvaro's smile thinned to a wire. You refuse? I refuse, Elena said, and surprised herself with how the word did not tremble. This is not your discovery, Professor. A scholar in the back, Dr. Rivas, a visiting epigrapher, cleared his throat. Before we turn this into a spectacle, perhaps we examine the evidence? The photograph indicates Miss Vargas studied with Don Mateo Ortega. If that is true, it would explain her competency with glyphic patterns. The name cracked the room wider. Alvaro's eyes hardened. Don Mateo, he said, laying disdain on the syllables like dust, was an eccentric who refused peer review. Sister Inés's voice, frail but steady, slipped into the space. He taught respect, and he taught this woman to hear what you do not. Rivas stepped forward, palms open. I met Ortega in Totonicapán in 2014. He could recite whole stelae from memory. He taught a counting rhythm I have never seen in print, embedded in prayers, sometimes even in the Latin Mass, to keep the old songs beneath the conqueror's tongues. If Miss Vargas recognized a Tzolk'in cycle in the Psalms, it would be because Ortega showed her how the old and the new were braided. Elena felt the old mountain wind lift in her chest. Tell them. The memory unfolded fully now. Nights in Mateo's adobe kitchen, while the rain drummed on the tin roof. Him tapping a spoon on the table, tap tap pause, tap 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 pause, to teach her how the Tzolk'in beat could hide inside a Gregorian chant. He had smiled, sad and fierce, when she asked why no papers. Because, Niña, some men would use our songs as ladders for their names. I will not give them the wood. Alvaro's laugh was a small, brittle thing. And yet here we are, Miss Vargas, bearer of secret songs, trying to smuggle them into scholarship. Number, this ends today. He pointed at the Bible. I'm seizing that volume. It will be moved to secure holdings. Elena slid a hand over the leather. You will not. Rivas's gaze flicked between them. Professor, to seize now is to admit the question has merit. If she has identified a location tied to the code, we should test it. A field check. It was meant as an olive branch. Alvaro snapped it. I will lead such an expedition when and if the board approves one. His eyes cut to Elena. You will be nowhere near it. The room sensed the cruelty and winced. A young intern, Mara, spoke from the doorway, voice cracking with nerves. Sir Professor, didn't you apply to study with Don Mateo years ago? Every head turned. She flushed, but barreled on. I catalogued your correspondence last month. He declined. For a heartbeat. The room breathed only Alvaro's humiliation. He recovered with a tight smile. And I am grateful. I prefer standards. Elena watched the pretense drape itself over him again, like a borrowed coat. He wanted Mateo, she realized, the thought ringing like a struck glass. He wanted the river, but he only learned to measure stones. Her throat burned. If I leave this room now, he will bury Mateo twice, once for refusing him and once for teaching me. Professor, she said softly, you may have standards. I have a map. Murmurs. Alvaro's mask shifted. A map conjured from fantasies doesn't become real because you whisper it. Rivas lifted his hands again. Enough. I'll put my reputation on a simple test. If Miss Vargas can demonstrate predictive alignment on an independent map colonial, not hers, we convene a committee. If she cannot, we drop this. Denied, Alvaro said instantly. Sister Ines, ancient and suddenly formidable, stepped between them. Denied is a word for the frightened. You taught her to be frightened, Professor. I will not add my name to that. She turned to Elena, and in a single, declarative motion, laid a faded compass and a rosary on the table. Your mentor once left these in the donation box. I saved them for the right hands. The room tilted. Elena touched the compass, its glass clouded by the oil of long use. Go, the needle seemed to say. Go where the ceiba drinks the sky. In her mind the jungle rose green and humid, the triangle she had drawn closing like a hand. If I don't go now, they will take what is not theirs. Her thoughts sharpened into a vow. I will not let Mateo's silence become their proof. Alvaro, sensing the room slipping, slammed his palm on the complaint. Effective immediately. Miss Vargas is barred from the archive. Security will collect the Bible. Rivas stepped in front of the book, Mara beside him, and Sister Ines, frail hand clutching the rosary, made a human wall. Alvaro stared, weighed the optics, and chose retreat, for now. Elena gathered her notebook and lifted the compass. She heard the old spoon rhythm in her pulse. Tap, tap, pause, tap, 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 pause, and thought, you showed me the song, Don Mateo. I'll follow it into the green. She walked out before anyone could stop her, already calculating flights to Guatemala and the name of a guide Mateo had once trusted, Tomás Sol. The city of silence did not sing, Fray Sebastian had written. But Elena could hear the beat that would take her there. The heat arrived like a hand over the mouth. From the airstrip at Flores to the dirt road that buckled toward the Petén lowlands, the air grew heavier, until even breath felt borrowed. Tomás Sol, wiry and quiet, drove with one hand on the wheel and the other counting something on his fingers. A rhythm Elena recognized the way. You recognize the smell of rain before it falls. He had Mateo's patience, the same careful way of noticing, which leaves gleamed with new cuts, which birdsong stuttered when strangers passed. This road ends, he said, not looking at her. Then canoe. Then feet. 3 days if the Bajos are kind. 5 if they are not. Elena folded the colonial map on her lap. The constellation of pinpricks aligned with a plastic overlay she had traced at her desk. The compass Sister Ines had given her lay warm against her palm. Ceiba drinks the sky, she thought. The phrase, a bell, she carried in her chest. She felt the old humiliation stirring like a ghost and shut it down. You mocked the beat, Alvaro. I will walk it. They made the river at dusk, a ribbon of bronze under a sky rubbed raw with color. Tomás heaved their gear into a narrow canoe and pushed off the paddle, dipping with the even, unshowy strength of people who do hard things without narrating. The howler monkeys roared in the canopy, a primal engine that made Elena's bones vibrate. Mosquitoes strafed exposed skin. The jungle pressed close, green upon green, vines threading like questions. At a bend where the banks rose into root walls, Tomás slowed. We ask, he said simply, and lifted his chin at the water. He murmured in Quechua, then in Spanish, permission to pass. We are only listeners. He waited a breath, then 2, before paddling on. Elena felt shame prick her. How quickly she had come armed with proofs and overlays. How slowly she had remembered the first lesson Mateo had ever taught her. You ask before you touch what is older than your name. They camped on a spit of root-laced ground. Under the tarp, The night breathed around them. Elena drifted, then woke to a sound like a broom dragged across gravel. Her hand found the compass by reflex. A band of leaf-cutter ants passed, hauling bright green sails. The small procession steadied her nerves. Even here there is order, she told herself. Find the pattern. Morning broke with a storm that had not been invited. Rain hammered the river into a skin of needles. They pushed anyway. By noon the canoe bumped against a snag and spun. Their pack pitched into the water. Elena lunged, caught a strap, and felt the current tear her forward. Tomas's hand clamped her shoulder and anchored her to the world. Together they dragged the pack onto a root shelf, water sluicing. The radio inside sputtered and died. They inventoried in tight silence: machete, rope, rations, filters saved. The printed colonial map, sealed in plastic, damp but legible. The overlay gone. The river having drunk the second half of her certainty. She stared into the brown surge, a childish grief rising in her throat. I should have double-wrapped it. How could I be so? Tomas's voice cut the thought cleanly. Maps burn, rivers take paper, we have the beat, he said, tapping a finger on the canoe's gunwale. Tap, tap, pause, tap, 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 pause. Your head holds what your hand lost. They beached where the river thinned to a green vein and started on foot. The jungle became a book with its pages stuck together. Vines hooked at clothing. Thorn palms printed warnings on forearms. Twice they skirted bajos, pools of black water slick as oil over sucking mud. Once a fer de lance coiled under a buttress root and tasted their heat with its tongue. Tomas eased them backward, his breath measuring time. Elena felt her heart batter against bone and thought, do not be a loud thing, be a steady thing. Near midday, the canopy opened to a dappled court, and there, like a column caught mid-step, stood a ceiba. Its buttresses rose like sails. Its trunk held the solemn arrogance of a king. The air around it felt oddly dense, a hush that made even the insects hesitate. Tomas removed his hat. Arbol madre, he said. Mother tree. Elena circled, palms damp, and found it. A shallow carving on one buttress, a weather-eaten spiral paired with bars and dots. Not Spanish, not missionary mischief. Old. Her hand trembled as she traced the gouges, measuring intervals with her thumb. They matched the spacing she had pricked through the Bible's pages. It's real, she breathed. Mateo was right. Sebastian was right. A memory surged one she had locked away with the pictures of that summer. Mateo had pressed a knotted cord into her palm at a mountain shrine, each knot a day of prayer. If you ever go where the silence is thick, he had said, tie this to the living and listen to the pull. She had hidden the cord in a drawer for 10 years, ashamed of talismans. It lay now in her pack because, in a moment of private weakness before leaving, she had slipped it in. She fished it out and tied it to the ceiba's lowest limb. The cord tugged gently in the wind toward the northwest quadrant of the clearing. Tomas watched, unreadable. He told me you would come, he said finally, the words like a stone dropped into calm water. Not your name, your way of holding sound. He said, guide the one who hears the beat, even when men shout. The revelation rearranged the air between them. Elena felt seen in a way that made her want to cry and run at once. They set bearings with the compass and moved in the direction the cord had pointed. The ground rose subtly underfoot until roots knitted into a ridge. Elena stopped, chest heaving. Beneath the leaf litter, the ridge felt different, a firmness that mocked soil. She knelt, swept debris aside, and revealed a pale band of packed limestone running straight into the trees, a raised road, narrow but unmistakable. A sakbe, Tomas whispered. A white road. The realization crashed through her like light. The triangle had not been a metaphor. It was geometry laid upon earth. They were walking the inside edge of her drawn shape. You did this, Elena, her mind dared to say. You found the door. A wind moved, and the jungle answered, with a sudden flood of sound then, as if a hand pressed each throat, quiet. Even the monkeys hushed. The silence was not absence. It felt like a listening. The City of Silence, Sebastian had written. Elena swallowed, aware of her own breath, barging into a place that asked for reverence. Tomas crouched and touched the sack bay, as if greeting an old friend. Then he pointed to the clay near the road's edge. A print, not jaguar, boot, fresh. His voice was low. We are not the first. The jungle held its breath, and Elena felt the beat quicken under her skin. The boot print had a companion, then another. Tomas traced the edges with 2 fingers, reading the depth the way a tracker reads confession. 3 men, he said. Heavy packs. Hours, not days. He straightened and listened. The jungle offered only a wet hush. Elena's stomach fell through her. They followed the sack bay as it sloped and veered, the white stones sometimes vanishing under leaf litter, reappearing like a remembered phrase. At a rise, they found a cigarette butt pressed into the clay. No local would waste nicotine like that here, Tomas said. Elena picked it up with a twig. The filter was branded European. They came upon the camp exactly when she hoped they wouldn't. A rectangle of trampled fern. A tarp lashed to a pair of saplings. Boot prints pinwheeling like panic. Her breath hitched. The prints spiraled around a scar of blackened earth where something had been burned. Tomas crouched and lifted a corner of ash. Plastic had melted into a hard black tear. He turned toward their own packs, instinctively too late. The tarp she and Tomas had left rolled under a buttress root, gone. Your notebook? He said. Elena's hand went to her chest. The Bible copies, the pricked constellation, the letter extracts, all in a waterproof pouch she had hidden in a sleeve of the tarp. A voice drifted from the trees. Good morning, Miss Vargas. Alvaro stepped into view with the confidence of a man arriving late to a rehearsal he funded. He wore a broad-brimmed hat and the grin of borrowed authority. 2 men flanked him, one compact, one barrel-shouldered, both with the crew-cut utility of contractors who call themselves logistics. Doctor. Rivas stood behind them, face pale, a canvas bag slung over his shoulder. Shame flashed across his expression when he met Elena's eyes. Rivas, Elena said, a plea and a warning tangled into one syllable. He spread his hands helplessly. He obtained permits. If anyone was going to step here legally this week, it was his team. Alvaro twitched the ash from his cuff. I am, after all, committed to standards. He nodded at the nearest contractor, who lifted Elena's waterproof pouch from a cargo pocket and tossed it to Alvaro, who didn't bother to hide his hunger as he rifled through her notes. And to housekeeping, your handwriting has improved. The ground tilted under Elena and righted when Tomas placed himself between her and Alvaro, not aggressively, just with the steady geometry of a door. Alvaro's gaze flicked to him, dismissive. Your guide is charming, he said. Tell him to stand down. We're all professionals. Tomas didn't move. You burned their camp, he said in Spanish. That is not professional. It's tidy. Alvaro shifted to Spanish with the awkwardness of a tongue that prefers to command in only one language. And we will keep it tidy. Miss Vargas, I must insist you accompany us and show us exactly where your little triangle points. You have put everyone in danger by coming without support. Consider this rescue. A thought broke open in him then, that old thought he kept coiled under his ribs. You could have had this if Mateo had said yes. The memory was not a memory so much as a burn scar. He pressed now to feel pain. A letter from Don Mateo, 12 years ago, declining to take him as a student. The expedition he led anyway, a year later. The grad student, Luisa, who slipped on rain-slick stone and shattered her ankle, while Alvaro insisted they press on because the light was perfect. He had sealed the story with grants and charm. It still woke him on humid nights. Elena saw some echo of it in the brittleness of his mouth. He believes the jungle owes him what the mountain denied, she thought. Rage rose like a tide, and beneath it, a colder thing. Strategy. This is not a rescue, she said. It's theft. He smiled. History is, by definition, theft refined into narrative. He pointed into the trees. We go that way. Now. Tomas shifted his weight. The contractor to Alvaro's left unslung a compact rifle with a bored familiarity and let it hang at his chest, the barrel down but conversational. Rivas flinched. "That's unnecessary," he said. "Insurance," Alvaro said. "The petain is untidy." The jungle exhaled a new sound, subtle, but Elena felt it like a tap on a glass. "We are close," she whispered, and hated that she'd given anything to him, even that. She pulled the compass from her pocket and, without glancing at it, angled her body to block Alvaro's line of sight. "Fine," she said, "but we do this my way. The Sacbe forks ahead. If you take the left spur, you'll end waist-deep in a bajo. You want the right." Alvaro's eyes narrowed. He looked at the contractors, then at Rivas. "You heard the lady." They moved. The Sacbe braided into two pale threads. Elena took the right, counting her steps in the beat Mateo had taught her. Tap, tap, pause, tap, 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 pause. Tomas caught her rhythm and softened their pace. The contractors tramped, cursing when thorn palms found the tender spaces between glove and sleeve. At a narrow cut, the white road crossed a gully, by way of a collapsed bridge, a wedge of stones fallen into a V. Elena picked a line across the remaining lip and stepped. The stone shifted under her boot. Tomas grabbed her arm, steadied her. Behind them, the barrel-shouldered contractor scoffed and jumped to a wider slab farther down. The slab was a lie. It tilted and vanished. His foot plunged. He windmilled, slammed his weight onto the lip where Tomas braced. The sudden pull jerked Tomas into the void up to his waist. Pain ripped across his face. Elena lunged, grabbed his shoulder straps, and ground her heels into the stone. The contractor dangled, cursing. Alvaro hovered, useless, parsing risk and optics. Rivas dropped his bag and crawled to help Elena. Together they hauled Tomas up, his legs scraped and bleeding. The contractor scrambling behind like a frightened animal. Alvaro recovered his poise with wrath. "Enough of your incompetence," he snapped at the men. Then at Elena, "You will walk where I say." "No," Elena said. Her voice was calm now, the calm of someone who has lost what can be lost. She gestured into the trees, where the air went oddly still, as if listening. "You want the city of silence? It will not open for you. It has heard what you are." She glanced at Rivas, let him see the choice he had been avoiding, then at Tomas, who nodded once. She stepped backward off the lip and slid into the gully, then under the overhang where the Sacbe stones had shielded a narrow crawl space. She had seen the dark seam as they hauled Tomas free. Now she ducked into it without asking permission. "This way," she called to Tomas, low and quiet. Alvaro lunged to follow, his shoulder wedged in the narrow throat of the rock. The contractors shoved and cursed. Rivas hesitated, then dropped his gaze and slid after Elena, breath shaking. "Miss Vargas," Alvaro's voice frayed. "You cannot shut me out. Watch me," Elena thought. And the silence ahead answered with a pulse like a held note. The crawl space ran cool and close beneath the Sacbe, a stone throat swallowing their breath. Elena went first, palm flat to the ceiling, where roots braided through mortar like patient fingers. Tomas followed on his elbows, teeth clenched against the throb in his leg. Rivas slid behind, his backpack scraping rock in a cadence that made Elena think absurdly of a metronome. The tunnel angled upward. A draft brushed their faces cool, mineral, immense. Then the dark thinned, and they rose into a chamber, so still it felt like the inside of a held note. A slit of daylight drew a blade across the floor. Along the walls, glyphs marched in shallow relief, their curves softened by time. Rivas wiped his hands on his trousers and crouched, whispering the way one speaks to a sleeping child. This style, terminal classic, maybe post-classic overlays. Look, this cartouche repeats, not a royal name, a place name. His finger hovered above a glyph that paired a stylized tree with an eye, a ceiba, watching. Elena heard her mentor's voice. A memory opened its mouth. The old cities like to hide in their own echoes. If you listen, They'll tell you how to approach. She closed her eyes, found the beat tap tap pause, and stepped through the ragged doorway into a light that swallowed words. The plaza unfurled beneath a cathedral of green. Mounded pyramids shouldered up under strangler figs. A ball court lay half-sunk, its sloped walls etched with serpents that looked ready to uncoil. 3 ceibas rose from the plaza's edges, forming the triangle she had plotted on paper. Their crowns knitted a canopy, and the space they made in the center felt deliberate, a bowl for noticing. The air had a weight, not of heat, but of attention. Even the insects softened their insistence, as if the city had pressed a finger to its lips. Tomas took off his hat and did not speak for a count of 20. Rivas's mouth worked, but he produced only a dry exhale, then a choked laugh that was not amusement but relief. Elena felt her eyes burn. "You are real," she thought, addressing the stones, the trees, the silence itself. You waited for someone small enough to enter quiet. At the plaza's heart, a low altar stone stood tilted, its surface carved with a cross that was not a cross. A ceiba trunk with 4 arms reaching cardinal points, a tiny cluster of bars and dots tucked at each end. Elena traced the counts with a trembling finger. 29, 92, 104. The psalms of trees. Each cluster sat where the ceiba's arm met a direction, like a compass that had learned to pray. Beneath the emblem, shallower but visible when she angled the light, ran a line of glyphs. Rivas sounded under his breath. Here, they brought the book of the strangers. We stitched our days into their leaves. We hid the path in the songs the strangers sing. My God. He looked up, eyes wet. It's the code. Your code. A thought flared in Elena, bright and guilty. I am the first to read this in centuries. Then another thought arrived to break it. Not first, only next. She swallowed, wiped her palm on her shirt, and began to work with the controlled frenzy of grace, photographing, sketching, counting, measuring angles with Sister Inés's cloudy compass. Tomas limped the plaza's perimeter, reading the ground the way one reads a letter from a friend. He pointed out where causeways met the plaza like arteries, where stelae lay face down as if hiding their names. The jungle murmured. A voice cut it like a machete. Elena. Alvaro staggered from the tunnel mouth. Hat gone, shirt torn, dignity bleeding out of him in hot bursts. The contractors followed, scraped and furious. He stopped at the plaza's edge, as if an invisible threshold had pushed back. For a blink the arrogance drained from his face, and a boy peered out, the one who had wanted Don Mateo to say yes. Then the old armor slammed down. Photographs, he barked. Coordinates. Now. Elena did not move. This city does not belong to you. It doesn't belong to you either, he snapped, voice echoing off the ball court in a way that turned his words thin and strange. The echo returned wrong, as if the stone had refused to mouth his shape. He flushed, annoyed at physics he could not charm. Rivas! Rivas stayed with Elena. No, he said, softly at first, then louder when his courage arrived. Number. We proceed with the instituto, with the council, with consent. We do not loot a living place. Alvaro stepped forward. The plaza seemed to narrow. He mounted the ball court's lip and raised his arms. I, not you, will announce this discovery. The moment ripened with a cruel intelligence. Tomas whispered, no shouting. But Alvaro, sensing his audience history itself, poured volume into his claim. The city of silence is. The court answered with a returning shout, a slapped-back wave that staggered him. His boot rolled on a dislodged stone. His weight went where the builders had never meant weight to go. The slab tilted, broke its long pact with friction, and slid. Alvaro dropped with it, snatching at the edge. Fingers hooked a seam. His body swung over a cavity that exhaled cold, wet air, the mouth of a hidden cenote yawning black beneath the court. For an instant, Elena watched the equation the universe offered. Arrogance plus gravity equals justice. Her mind hissed, let go and the story writes itself. Another voice rose, older, quieter. Justice is not vengeance. Do not turn the beat into noise. Rope, she shouted. Tomas had it already, hand over hand with a fisherman's economy. Rivas braced his back against the altar stone. Elena knotted the rope to Mateo's old prayer cord, because it was what she had, then belly crawled to the edge. Alvaro's face was gray with fear. She saw in it the boy again, the letter again, the wound he had fed for years until it learned to bite others. Take it, she said. He took it. They hauled. Stones skittered into the dark like discarded teeth. The contractors pulled too, their competence returning when panic gave them a job. With a final groan, Alvaro slid onto stone and lay gasping, palms bloodied, eyes wild. Silence settled back over the court as if nothing had happened. He stared at Elena, hatred and confusion wrestling in the same stare. Why? He rasped. Because some songs aren't ours to sell, she said, and watched the sentence find the part of him that still understood Mateo. He rolled onto his side and sobbed once, an ugly, broken sound. The city held it without echo. Elena rose, legs shaking, and lifted her camera again. She spoke without looking at him. Dr. Rivas, please witness. The ceiba compass with Tzolk'in counts aligning to Psalms 29, 92, and 104. The place name glyph indicating City of Silence. The Sakbe arteries leading to 3 cardinal causeways. We will file our report with the proper authorities. Tomas will speak for the community. Rivas's voice steadied. I witness. Tomas nodded, eyes on the ceiba. And I will speak for the living. Elena took one last measure and felt the plaza breathe with her, an exhale that smelled of rain about to fall. You waited, she thought, tired and grateful. You did not need a conqueror. You needed a listener. She closed the notebook, laid her palm briefly on the altar, and let the beat she carried match the city's. Tap, tap, pause. Tap, 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 pause. Somewhere, a bird called once and was quiet. 3 months later, the air in the monastery's long reading room smelled less of dust than of rain on stone. Someone had opened the high windows, and the city's September weather drifted in like a blessing. Reporters waited outside the gates for coordinates they would never receive. The Instituto had convened a council with community leaders. Tomas sat at the head of that table, hat on his knee, voice unhurried as he set terms. No public maps, no dawn of adventure tourism, no digging without consent. Elena signed documents with hands that remembered vines and limestone more than pens. Rivas's name stood beside hers. The paper also named the people whose land held the silence. Across the courtyard, a different ceremony unfolded without microphones. Sister Inés led Elena down to the familiar vault, where the Bible now rested in a climate-stable case. No longer a prop for anyone's performance, but an artifact under watchful care. One more thing, the old nun said, sliding a small wrapped parcel from her sleeve. When you returned, we rebound folio 417. This fell out of the spine. She unfolded a fragile scrap, lines cramped but legible. A postscript in Fray Sebastian's hand. The young scribe who copies for me, he writes in both tongues. He tells me their day count lives inside our book now. For a road the old ones guard with ceibas. I thought to scrape the ink. I could not. Perhaps the Lord prefers hidden songs to open theft. Elena felt the words reach backward and forward at once, as if the city itself had written the addendum. So it was not accident, she thought. Palms warming the glass of the case, not mischief, not conquest, a braid. The revelation landed with the soft force of justice. Centuries ago, a bilingual hand had threaded a path through the leaves of Scripture, trusting that one day a listener would come. Outside, metal flashed in the sun. Alvaro stood by the gate in a suit that had lost its appetite for swagger. The board had suspended his permits. The contractors, invisible now, had other work. He had written 2 letters in the weeks since, one to the Instituto, one to Elena. The first was precise, defensive, weighed down by context. The second had been shorter. I do not know who I was in that plaza. I am sorry, I tried to own a silence meant to be shared. He had not sent it. It lay in his desk, an anchor that would not sink. Today he had come with nothing in his hands. He found Elena under the cloister. "Miss Vargas," he said, and the old title sounded odd in the mouth that had tried to shut her out. "Dr. Vargas." He corrected himself, small chagrin flickering. "I came to listen." Her heart, which had learned suspicion as a reflex, lifted a boundary and left it in place. Listening is not penance, she warned herself. But it is a start. Aloud she said, "The council will meet again next month. Sit in the back. Speak." When asked, for a moment the old furnace flared in him, the muscle memory of command tightening his jaw. In his head, you could reclaim the frame. You could be the man who learned. Another thought cut it. Or, you could be the man who finally stopped needing frames. He nodded. "I will sit," he said. The admission scared him and lightened him at once. The press conference turned out to be a litany of what they would not do. No coordinates released. No artifacts removed. No names of nearby villages printed. Elena stepped to the microphone only to say, "We're not here to announce an adventure. We are here to acknowledge a relationship. The city of silence belongs to the living first." Cameras recorded bafflement, then curiosity. Tomás spoke next in Quechua and Spanish, and even those who did not understand the first tongue felt the cadence of it, the tap-tap pause, the tap-tap-tap pause, like a door opening without spectacle. Back in Guatemala, the plaza slept under its green cathedral. LiDAR teams mapped ridges at a respectful distance. The images proved what the city had already told her. The Sacbay network stitched outward like a net of thought. 3 causeways aligning with the ceibas, the altar's counts closing the loop between song and stone. Rivas drafted the first paper, with knuckles that still remembered pulling a man from a hole in the earth. He wrote slowly, placing the word consent where other men had placed discovery. At night, Elena dreamed in beats. In the dream, she sat at Mateo's kitchen table and watched the old spoon rhythm, the rain on the roof counting along. "Some songs aren't ours to sell," he would say again, not as rebuke, but as instruction. She woke with a question pressed against her ribs. What now? The answer surprised her with its smallness. She returned to work. She repaired bindings. She taught interns to breathe before they touched a page. When Mara from the archives came shyly to ask if learning glyphs was allowed, Elena smiled. "Allowed? It's necessary," she said, and wrote out the simple cadence that had saved her. Tap, tap, pause. Tap, 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 pause. One afternoon, while rain braided itself against the windows, Elena and Sister Ines stood before the Bible's case as a school group filed through. A boy pointed at the faint markings and whispered, "It looks like a secret." Elena leaned down. "It was a secret," she said. "Not to keep you out, but to keep a road safe, until someone asked the right way to enter." Across the courtyard, Alvaro sat alone on a bench, listening to the bells. He let the envy pass through him without giving it a chair. In its place, something humbler arrived. A memory of his own first field season, the taste of fear when the jungle had once swallowed his pride and returned him whole. He took a pen from his pocket and finally finished the second letter. It contained no explanations, just a line. "Thank you for not letting me become the worst story I could have told about myself." Tomás visited in October with a basket of guavas and a list of names for a community archive. "We will keep copies of everything on our side too," he told Elena. "Not to take, to guard." They sat under the cloister and made a plan for a room that smelled like cedar and rain. Elena realized that she was not the story's author, but one of its archivists. The knowledge eased something that ambition had kept taut. That night, alone in the stacks, she placed a palm against the Bible's case and let her breathing settle into the old count. "You opened because we approached like listeners," she thought, and the silence in the room answered like a friend returning from a long journey. If this story touched you, subscribe to the channel to discover more stories about how extraordinary people turn humiliation into triumph.